You ever hear a gate scream like it's begging you to stop and realize nobody's listening anymore? The first time it happened, I thought it was an accident, just some lost driver cutting too close to my property line. But by the third morning, same time, same white SUV, same low rumble of an engine pushing past where it had no business being. I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was routine, calculated, almost casual, like my ranch was just another stretch of empty land waiting to be claimed. And that gate, the one I spent 2 full weekends welding, measuring every inch twice, setting deep into. The Texas dirt with posts sunk over 3 feet down. That gate became nothing more than a suggestion to her, something to break through on her way to wherever she thought she was more important than everyone else. And I could smell it before I even saw it each morning. That faint mix of hot rubber and dust hanging in the air like a warning. The kind of smell that sticks in your throat and tells you something's off, something's wrong. And sure enough, there it was again, metal bent just enough to show impact, hinges stressed, the latch hanging like it gave up trying. And I'd stand there, boots grinding against gravel, staring at what used to be a boundary, trying to figure out how someone could look at a closed gate and decide it didn't apply to them. My name's Ethan Cole, and I didn't buy this land for shortcuts or neighbors with opinions. I bought it because after 20 years of construction work, long days, busted knuckles, and more noise than silence, I wanted something simple, something that was mine, measured in acres instead of minutes, where the only thing crossing my property line was the wind, not a stranger in a luxury SUV acting like she owned the road. But that's exactly what Brenda Whitmore thought she did. HOA president, always dressed like she was heading to a meeting nobody asked for, driving that oversized white SUV like it came with authority. Like the badge she didn't have still meant something out here. And the first time I confronted her, she didn't even deny it, just gave me that smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, and said it was more convenient, that my gate was in the way of what she called community access, like my private land was suddenly public property because she decided it should be. And that's when I realized this wasn't about a gate anymore. It was about lines, the kind you draw in dirt and steel and expect people to respect, and the kind people like her walk over just to see if you'll stop them. So I fixed the gate, stronger, tighter, told myself maybe that was enough. Maybe she'd get the message. But the next morning, 6:42 a.m., same engine, same speed, same impact, and that was the moment something in my head shifted. Not anger, not yet, just a quiet understanding, a calculation starting to form. Because if she thought this was just a gate she could keep breaking, then she had no idea what I was about to build next. I stopped reacting after the 5th time, because reacting was exactly what she expected, standing there with my hands on my hips like some frustrated neighbor begging for respect. That was her game, and I could see it now in the way she timed everything down to the minute. 6:42 every morning like clockwork, engine humming low before the impact, tires crunching gravel that did not belong to her, and then that dull metallic thud followed by the slow creak of stressed hinges, not enough to completely destroy the gate anymore. Just enough to remind me she could do it whenever she wanted. And what bothered me most was not the damage, it was the pattern, the intention behind it, the way she turned my property line into a suggestion instead of a boundary. So I started paying attention, real attention, the kind you learn after years on construction sites where one wrong measurement can cost you thousands. I watched the camera footage frame by frame, counted the seconds from when her tires left the pavement to when they hit the gate, measured the angle of her approach, the exact point of contact where the metal always gave just enough to let her through. And I noticed something else too. She never slowed down, not even a little, like she had already decided the outcome before she even reached the gate, like the result was guaranteed, and that kind of certainty only comes when someone has never been told no in a way that actually sticks. I tried the official route once, called the county office, explained that someone was repeatedly damaging private property. The woman on the line sounded sympathetic, but her answer was the same one everyone gives. Civil matter, file a report, take it to court. Words that sounded useful until you realized they meant nothing would change anytime soon. And Brenda knew that. You could see it in her posture the next time I walked up to her SUV after she rolled through again, window down, sunglasses on, acting like we were having a casual conversation instead of standing next to a bent piece of steel that used to be my gate. She said I was overreacting, said the previous owner had allowed access years ago, said the community needed efficient routes, every sentence wrapped in that same calm tone that made it sound reasonable if you did not look too closely. But I had already checked the records, every inch of that road, every foot of land. It all belonged to me. No easement, no shared access, just my name on paper and a line she kept crossing anyway. So I stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped giving her anything she could push against. Because pushing against something solid is what people like her enjoy. They test it, lean on it, see if it moves, and if it does, they keep going. But if it does not, if it stays perfectly still, that is when they get careless, and careless people make predictable mistakes. That was the moment I understood this was not about stopping her. It was about letting her keep doing exactly what she had been doing, same speed, same angle, same confidence. Because the more predictable she became, the easier it was for me to design something that would not fight her behavior. It would simply let it play out. And that idea sat in my mind like a blueprint waiting to be drawn, every measurement, every material choice, every detail lining up with what I had already seen. And as I stood there that evening, running my hand along the bent metal, feeling the rough edge where it had given way one too many times, I realized something simple and clear I did not need to stop her from driving through my gate. I just needed to make sure that the next time she did, the outcome would not be the one she expected. By the next morning, I was not watching her to get angry anymore. I was watching her to learn. And there is a difference you can feel in your chest, the kind that replaces frustration with focus. So I set up a second camera lower to the ground, angled toward the hinge line. Because that is where truth lives, not in the noise of impact, but in the quiet details of how something gives, how it bends, how it fails just enough to let force win. And what I saw confirmed everything I had started to suspect. The old gate was not weak. It was predictable. It flexed at the same point every time. A fraction of an inch too much clearance, a hinge pin that allowed just enough rotation under pressure, small tolerances that added up into a path she could push through without ever realizing she was being helped by the design itself. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Every creak, every shift in metal becomes a number, a calculation, something you can change. So I spent that afternoon out in the workshop, the smell of cut steel and hot oil filling the air, sparks snapping off into the dirt like brief flashes of thought. And I started rebuilding, not replacing, because replacing would have been obvious. She would have noticed a new gate, slowed down, questioned it. And I could not have that. I needed her to believe nothing had changed. Same look, same color, same slight sag she had come to expect. So I reused the outer frame, kept the visible lines exactly the same, even left a faint scuff where her bumper had kissed the metal before. But inside, everything was different. Thicker core support, reinforced cross members hidden behind the paneling, hinge mounts reset deeper into the post with a fixed axis that did not allow that familiar give, and the posts themselves. I dug them out another foot and a half, packed the base with compacted gravel, and set new anchors that would not shift under repeated stress. Not flashy, not complicated, just solid, quiet engineering that does not announce itself until it matters. And while I worked, I kept replaying her routine in my head, the timing, the speed, the confidence, because this was never about stopping her from trying. It was about making sure that when she did, the situation answered her instead of me. By sunset, the gate looked exactly like it had the day before, maybe even a little worse if you did not know what to look for. A tired piece of metal hanging on a ranch line, nothing worth slowing down for. And that was the point. I wiped my hands clean, stepped back, and listened to the evening settle in, the wind brushing through the dry grass, the faint hum of distant traffic far beyond my property. Everything calm, everything still, and I knew tomorrow would come the same way it always did. 6:42 in the morning, engine first, then gravel, then that moment right before impact where everything holds its breath. Except this time, there would be no give waiting for her. Only a result she had never had to think about before. And as I turned off the lights in the workshop, one thought stayed clear and steady in my mind. She was about to find out the difference between a gate that breaks and a gate that remembers exactly where it stands. At 6:41 the next morning, everything felt sharper, like the air itself was waiting, and I stood just inside the workshop doorway with a cup of coffee gone cold in my hand, watching the monitor instead of the road. Because by now I knew exactly how this would start. The low hum first, distant but steady, then the faint crunch of tires leaving pavement and meeting gravel. a sound I had heard so many times it no longer surprised me. It just confirmed the pattern was still intact and right on schedule. There she was, the white SUV cutting across the edge of my property like it belonged to her. Not a hint of hesitation, not a tap on the brakes, just that same confident line aimed straight at the gate. And for a second, just 1 second, I wondered if she would notice anything different, if some instinct would tell her to slow down, to question it. But she did not, because why would she? Nothing had ever stopped her before. And that was the problem. Not the gate, not the land, but the certainty she carried into every decision, the belief that the outcome was already decided in her favor. So she kept coming, speed steady, angle perfect, exactly the way she had done it every other morning. And I could hear it even through the glass, the engine rising slightly as she committed, that subtle push forward that said she was not just passing through, she was asserting something. And then it happened. Not a violent moment, not chaos, just a sudden, complete stop to the motion she expected, like the world answered her with something solid for the first time. The front of her vehicle dipping as the gate did not move, did not bend, did not give her that familiar opening she had trained herself to expect. And the sound was different too. Not the tearing groan of metal failing, but a dull, contained impact that ended almost as soon as it began, followed by silence, real silence. The kind that settles in when something does not go the way it always has. And I set the cup down without realizing it. Eyes still on the screen, watching her sit there for a moment, engine idling, like she needed a second to process what just happened, because for the first time, the routine had broken, and routines are powerful things. They let people act without thinking. They let them believe they understand the world around them. Until one day, the world answers differently, and they are left trying to catch up. She stepped out slowly, looked at the gate, then at her vehicle, then back at the gate again. Like she was searching for the part that was supposed to fail, the weak point she had been relying on without even knowing it. And there was nothing there for her to use, nothing loose, nothing bent, just the same gate she had been driving through for weeks, standing exactly where it should have been all along. And that was when I understood something even clearer than before. This was not just about one moment. This was about everything that led to it. Every time she chose to ignore a boundary. Every time she assumed it would move for her. And now she was standing there, faced with something that did not move, something that did not argue, did not warn, did not react. It simply stayed in place and forced her to deal with the result. And as I watched her walk around, phone already in her hand, probably dialing someone who would tell her this was not supposed to happen, I leaned back against the doorframe and let out a slow breath, because the gate had done exactly what it was built to do, not stop her, but show her what happens when something finally does. She did not look at me right away, even though she knew I was there, because people like Brenda do not acknowledge something they do not understand until they can control the narrative around it. And right now, standing in front of a gate that refused to behave the way she expected, she had no narrative, just confusion wrapped in irritation, her phone pressed to her ear as she paced along the fence line, heels crunching against gravel that had never belonged to her, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch pieces of it. Words like unsafe, obstruction, and liability, all carefully chosen, all designed to shift the situation away from what actually happened and into something she could argue, something she could reshape. And I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorframe, arms relaxed, not saying a word, because this was the part where most people make a mistake. They rush in, explain, defend, try to win the moment. But I was not interested in the moment. I was interested in what came after. She ended the call and finally turned toward me. That same practiced expression settling back onto her face like nothing had changed, like the last few minutes had not just rewritten her routine. And she asked me, calm as ever, what I thought I was doing. Like this was something I had done to her instead of something she had done to herself over and over again. And I let a second pass before answering, not for effect, just to make sure the silence said what it needed to say. Then I told her the truth, simple and clear, that I had fixed my gate, nothing more, nothing less. And she laughed, short and sharp, like the answer offended her, like the idea that something could simply exist as it was supposed to was somehow unreasonable. She said the community had a right to access, that I was creating a hazard, that she would be reporting this, escalating it, using every word like a tool she had used before. And I nodded, not agreeing, just acknowledging that she was following the only script she knew, because without that script, she had nothing to stand on. And that is when she pointed at the gate, demanded that I open it, not asked, demanded, like authority could be spoken into existence if you said it confidently enough. And I shook my head once, slow, steady, and told her no, because there was nothing to negotiate, no misunderstanding to clear up, just a boundary that had always been there and was now finally acting like one. And for a brief second, I saw it, the crack in her certainty, the realization that this situation was not bending back into something familiar. And that is when she shifted again, stepped back, pulled her phone up, and started taking pictures, angles of the gate, the ground, her vehicle, building a version of events she could present later, something that would make sense to someone who was not here to see the pattern that led to this moment. And I let her, because pictures do not show repetition, they do not show intent, they do not show the quiet build-up of choices that bring someone to the same place again and again. They just freeze a single moment and let people fill in the rest. But I had something better than that, something that did not rely on interpretation. And as she walked back to her vehicle, still talking, still trying to regain control of a situation that had already moved past her, I glanced at the monitor inside, where every morning, every approach, every impact was recorded in perfect sequence, and I realized this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something much bigger, because now it was not just a gate she had to deal with. It was a record of every time she chose to ignore it. By noon, the story had already started to change, not on my land, but everywhere else, because people like Brenda do not handle resistance quietly. They amplify it, reshape it, send it out into the world in a version that makes them look reasonable. And by the time I checked my phone, there it was, a notification from the neighborhood app, her post sitting right at the top like it always did, carefully written, full of concern about safety, about blocked access, about how a certain property owner was creating a hazard that could affect emergency services. And I read it once, then again, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to understand exactly how she was framing this, how she was turning a line she crossed into a problem I caused. And it was almost impressive in a way, the confidence it takes to rewrite reality in real time. But confidence only works when there is nothing solid to push back against. And this time, there was. I walked back into the workshop, the faint smell of steel still hanging in the air from the day before, and pulled up the footage, not just from this morning, but from every morning before it. Each clip lined up in order, same timestamp, same approach, same impact point. A pattern so clear it did not need explanation, and I watched it all the way through, not rushing, letting each moment settle, because this was not about reacting to her post. It was about responding with something that did not rely on opinion, something that could not be argued down to a matter of perspective. And as I scrubbed through the footage, I noticed details I had not focused on before, the way her vehicle never hesitated, the way the gate always gave just enough until it did not, the way she never once treated it like a boundary, only an obstacle, and that difference mattered more than anything she could write online. I exported the clips, stitched them together in a simple sequence, no edits beyond what was already there, no dramatic cuts, just raw footage that showed exactly what had been happening for weeks. And when I was done, I sat back and looked at it for a moment, because this was the part where most people try to make a point, add commentary, explain what others should see. But I did not need to do any of that. The footage spoke for itself in a way words never could. And that is when my phone buzzed again, a message this time, not from her, but from someone else in the neighborhood, asking if what she posted was true, asking if the gate was really blocking access. And I typed out a short reply, nothing emotional, nothing defensive, just a link to the video and a single sentence. This is what has been happening every morning at 6:42, and I hit send, because that was all it needed. No argument, no back and forth, just a record placed in front of anyone willing to look at it. And within minutes, I could see the shift begin, comments changing tone, questions turning into something else, something closer to understanding, and I leaned back in the chair, listening to the quiet hum of the room, knowing that for the first time, this was not just between me and her anymore. It was out in the open, not as a story, but as a sequence of actions that led exactly where they were always going. And the best part was, I did not have to convince anyone of anything. I just had to let them see it. By late afternoon, the tone had shifted completely. Not because I argued harder or louder, but because the pattern I had been watching for weeks was now something everyone else could see too. And once people see a pattern, they cannot unsee it. The comments under her post stopped sounding like agreement and started sounding like questions, then doubts, then silence. And silence is something Brenda had never had to deal with before, because her authority depended on constant noise, constant reinforcement, people nodding along without looking too closely. But now there was something solid sitting underneath all of that, something that did not move no matter how many words she put around it. And I could tell it got to her, not from anything she said directly, but from what she did next, because instead of posting again, instead of doubling down the way she usually would, she showed up in person that evening. Not at the gate this time, but at my front door. Her knock sharpened, controlled, like she was still trying to set the tone before I even opened it. And when I did, she was already mid-sentence, talking about liability, about community standards, about how this situation had escalated unnecessarily, every word chosen carefully, every phrase designed to pull things back into a space where she had control. But something was different now, not in her voice, but in the space between her words, like she was measuring my reaction instead of assuming it. And I let her talk, did not interrupt, did not correct, just listened until she ran out of prepared lines. And when she did, there was a pause, a real one, the kind that forces someone to either feel it or face it. And that is when I spoke, not to argue, not to convince, just to state something simple, that the gate was staying exactly where it was, that the footage was already shared, and that if she believed there was a legal issue, she was welcome to pursue it through the proper channels. And I kept my tone even, the same way I would explain a measurement on a job site. No emotion, just fact. And for the first time since I had known her, she did not have an immediate response. Her expression held for a second, then shifted, not to anger, but to something closer to recalculating, like she was trying to find a version of this situation where she still came out on top. And when she finally spoke again, it was softer, less certain, asking instead of telling, suggesting that maybe there was a compromise, maybe a temporary solution, maybe I could open the gate during certain hours. And I shook my head once, slow and steady, because compromise only works when both sides respect the line to begin with. And she had already shown me she did not. And that answer, simple as it was, seemed to land harder than anything else, because it left no room for interpretation, no space to negotiate around, just a clear boundary that was not moving. And she stood there for another second, then nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, like she understood this was no longer a situation she could manage the way she always had. And when she turned and walked back toward her vehicle, the gravel sounded different under her steps, slower, more deliberate, like each one carried a little more weight than before. And I closed the door without watching her leave, because I did not need to see what came next to know that something had already changed, not the land, not the gate, but the way she moved through both of them. The next morning came quieter than any morning before it, not because the world had changed, but because she had, and I noticed it before I even looked at the monitor, that absence of sound where the low engine hum used to sit, that empty stretch of time at 6:42 when something always happened, and for a second, I almost missed it. Not her, not the damage, but the predictability of it, the routine I had come to measure everything else against. But quiet does not mean over. It just means something is shifting, and sure enough, at 6:48, 6 minutes later than usual, I saw her SUV roll slowly along the edge of the property, not cutting across like before, not committing to the path she had carved out of habit, just moving, careful, deliberate, like she was seeing the land for the first time instead of assuming it would move for her. And she stopped a few feet short of the gate, engine idling. The front of her vehicle angled just enough to suggest she was thinking about it, calculating, weighing the outcome instead of expecting it. And I watched from inside, not stepping out, not giving her anything to react to, because this moment was not about me anymore. It was about her deciding what kind of person she was going to be now that the old pattern did not work. She sat there for a while, longer than I expected, long enough for the morning air to settle into that stillness you only get before the day fully wakes up. And then she did something simple, something small, but different. She turned the wheel slightly, eased the vehicle back, and pulled away from the gate instead of through it, gravel crunching in a new direction, one she had always had but never used. And it would have been easy to call that the end, to say the problem was solved, that the boundary had been restored, but I knew better, because change that comes from a single moment does not always hold. It needs something to anchor it, something that reminds you why the old way stopped working. And later that afternoon, I got exactly that, a certified envelope in the mailbox at the end of the drive. Her name printed neatly in the corner, official, deliberate, and I opened it standing right there in the sun, the paper stiff between my fingers, reading through the language she had chosen this time. Not accusations, not demands, but a notice, formal, structured, outlining her claim that the gate created an obstruction to what she still called community access. And there it was again, the same idea dressed in new words, trying to find a way back in through a different angle. And I folded the paper once, slow and even, not reacting, not surprised. Because this was never just about one action or one response. It was about persistence, hers and mine. Two different approaches moving toward the same line from opposite sides. And as I stood there with that letter in my hand, the dust shifting under my boots, the gate visible in the distance exactly where it had always been, I understood that the next part of this was not going to happen at the gate. It was going to happen somewhere else, somewhere quieter, where words carried more weight than steel. And the real test was not whether she would try again, but whether she had learned anything from the first time it did not go her way. The county office smelled like old paper and air conditioning that never quite reached the corners, and I sat there with the letter folded neatly in front of me, not because I needed to read it again, but because I wanted to let it sit, let it be what it was without reacting to it too quickly, because this part was different from the gate. There was no metal here, no hinge to reinforce, just words and records and the quiet weight of documentation. And when my name was called, I walked up to the counter and slid both the letter and a printed copy of the footage timeline across the surface, not saying much, just enough to explain that there had been repeated unauthorized entry onto private property, that the situation had escalated into a formal claim, and that I was here to make sure everything was on record the way it actually happened, not the way it was being described. And the clerk, an older man with reading glasses perched low on his nose, took his time going through it, page by page, clip by clip, not rushing, not reacting, just absorbing. And that was the difference I had been counting on, because in a place like this, emotion does not carry weight, consistency does, patterns do. And what I had was not a story, it was a sequence. And when he finally looked up, he did not ask for clarification, he did not question intent. He simply nodded once and said that the documentation would be attached to the case file, that any claim regarding access would require proof of a recorded easement, and that without it, the property line stood as defined. Simple as that. No debate, no interpretation, just a line on a map backed by records that did not change based on who spoke the loudest. And I thanked him, gathered my papers, and stepped back out into the sun, the heat hitting different after being inside, sharper, more real. And as I drove back down the same stretch of road that had caused all of this, I noticed something else, not just the absence of her SUV at the gate, but the way the area felt settled, like a boundary had finally been recognized instead of tested. And when I pulled onto my property, the gate stood exactly where it had been, unchanged, quiet, doing nothing more than what it was built to do. And I stopped the truck for a second before getting out, just looking at it, remembering every measurement, every weld, every small decision that led to this point. And it hit me then, not as a realization, but as something I had known from the beginning, that none of this was ever about stopping someone. It was about standing firm long enough for the truth to surface on its own. And later that evening, as the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched across the land, my phone buzzed one more time. A notification that her claim had been reviewed and dismissed due to lack of supporting documentation. Just a few lines of text, nothing dramatic, nothing loud, but final in a way that mattered. And I set the phone down without replying, without reacting, because there was nothing left to say. The gate had already said it, every morning, every impact, every moment it refused to move. And as the wind moved through the grass and the last light faded, I stood there for a while, listening to the quiet, knowing that some lessons do not come from arguments or warnings, they come from something simple, something solid, something that stays exactly where it belongs, no matter how many times someone tries to push through it.